name's Jane Finley and I'm the Head of English. I'm going to run you through some slides that explain what Year 11 students will have to do in their 2 English examinations in the November mock series. Students will sit 2 exams for English. The first exam will be for English language. Students will be sitting Paper 1, Explorations in Creative Reading and Writing. The exam will last for 1 hour and 45 minutes. There are 2 sections to the exam. First of all, in Section A, students will be required to read. They will read 1 literature fiction text and then have 4 questions to answer on the extract that they've just read. The extract will be unseen and they will not be able to know what it is before they go into the exam. They will then have to answer 4 questions, which, as you will see, increase in marks as the paper continues. To begin with, they will answer a short question worth 4 marks. Then both question 2 and question 3 are worth 8 marks, finishing on a final question, question 4, which is worth 20 marks. Following the reading section, students will then have to complete a writing task, either descriptive or narrative, and they will get a picture to help them. In this question, question 5, students are expected to write for approximately 45 minutes, writing about the picture or their own imaginative story that they've created. This particular question is worth 40 marks, and so half of the overall paper's marks. It's really important that students learn that they have to keep writing and answering this question and that they don't give up. When revising for English language, you need to consider how established writers use narrative and descriptive techniques to capture the interest of readers. From the image on the right, you can see that we're looking for how writers use imagery, similes, metaphors, alliteration, personification, onomatopoeia, hyperbole, or idioms in order to make their writing more interesting for readers. In Section B, when you're writing your own creative text, students need to demonstrate those same skills that they've just been analysing and show that they can write their own narrative or descriptive using the same figurative language. Can our students use imagery? Can they successfully write a simile or a metaphor? Can they use alliteration, personification, or onomatopoeia for effect? This second section is testing the students on their ability to craft a story and to consider the structure of a piece of writing. To revise for English language, there are 4 key things that you can use. Firstly, take your exercise book home. Exercise books show you how you've answered the questions in class, along with models that you've done together with teachers and past assessments which have been marked and have feedback on them. There will also be work set on teams by your class teacher. There will be a run-through of a paper with voiced-over annotation on how to answer the questions. You can also use GCSE Pod. Make sure you select the AQA Language Paper 1 resources. And finally, you can use BBC Bitesize. Again, ensure that you're selecting the AQA exam board and looking at the resources for Language Paper 1. The second English exam that students will sit is the English Literature exam. They will sit Paper 1, which covers poetry from the anthology and an inspector calls. The time given for this paper is 1 hour and 45 minutes. In Section A, students will answer 1 question on the Power and Conflict cluster of poems from the poetry anthology we've been studying in class. Students also were asked to revise poems from this cluster during their initial closure of school. They will have 1 question which is worth 30 marks. In Section B, students answer 1 essay question from a choice of 2 on an inspector calls. They can choose between 2 potential essays and decide on the one that they would like to respond to. Again, this question is worth 30 marks. To revise for the section of poetry from the anthology, students will need to revise the poems we've recently been studying in class. These poems were grouped together under the themes of the power of humans and the power of nature. It would also be useful for students to revise the poems that we studied in June and July when school reopened. These are poems that are linked together by the theme of the power of war. For these poems, you need to know the themes and how writers use language and structure to capture the interest of the readers. The best way to revise for these is by taking home your poetry anthology, which is annotated with notes on each of the poem. To revise for section B, An Inspector Calls, you will need to revise the play, what happens, to who and when. You will also need to revise the characters, what they do, how they treat other people, and their role in the death of Eva Smith. You will need to revise the themes and the context. You need to know when the play was written, when the play was set, and what affected people in that time period. You need to know the themes and how Priestley uses language and structure to capture the interest of the audience. The materials that students need to be able to revise from for the anthology include their exercise book. It would also be useful to have the white poetry workbook, which you can see in the image on the right of the slide. This workbook is supported by lessons on teams, which have been voiced over by English teachers. We go through the poems, look at the language and the structure, and then answer the questions with students as they're using their workbook. You could also use GCSE Pod and make sure you're looking at power and conflict poems from the AQA exam board. Finally, BBC Bite Size has revision on some of the poems in the Power and Conflict anthology, but not all of the poems. To revise for an Inspector Calls, take home your exercise book. Have a look at past questions that we've answered in class, the work we've done on characters and themes, and have a look at your past assessments that you've done on this topic. There will also be work set on teams by your class teacher to support your revision. You can use GCSE Pod and search for an Inspector Calls, or BBC Bite Size, which has a really comprehensive guide on the play and what happens.